All right, we are live and ready to begin. Wanda, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Jessica. And welcome everyone to the Consent Decree Monitoring Team's Quarterly Community Forum. And the date is October 24th, 2022. And we're going to be addressing 3 different policies tonight. We're going to be talking about interactions with people with behavioral health disabilities or in crisis, as well as interactions with youth, and then First Amendment protected activities. We have quite a few people who have joined us. Our moderators tonight are going to be Mark Kelly and Dr. Philip Leaf. And I'm going to turn it over to you now, Ken. Ken is our lead monitor for the monitoring team. He's going to introduce the speakers tonight, as well as introduce the topics. Go ahead, Ken, it's all yours.
Thank you, Wanda, and thank you folks for joining. I thought what I would do first is give everyone at least a little background in terms of what we do, how we do it, and what to expect tonight. The way it works, the parties would be the Department of Justice, the City of Baltimore, and the Baltimore City Police Department. We meet along with the monitoring team. We meet once a month with the judge, except for 1 month out of the year. That means 11 meetings over the course of the year. And we will discuss one of the 16 topics that is outlined in the consent decree. This past quarter, as Wanda has pointed out, we really addressed 3 really, really important topics that deal a lot with how the police are supposed to interact with the public in several different domains. And as she indicated, one would be interacting with youth. The other would be interacting with people who have behavioral disabilities or otherwise in crisis. And the third would be First Amendment. And so tonight I have 2 of my esteemed partners on this mission. Dr. Randy DuPont, who really is a well-known psychologist in this area. He'll talk a little bit about youth and also how police are supposed to interact with people with disabilities or in crisis. And then I have my good friend and law partner, Seth Rosenthal, who will talk about how police are supposed to behave in terms of how they are to protect and make sure people's First Amendment rights are being protected. So, Juan, I don't know if you want to introduce your 2 co-hosts, or if you want me to go right into having, I'd probably start with Randy talking about his 2 areas and then Seth talking about talking about First Amendment. So it's up to you. How do you want me to handle that?
I'd like you to go ahead and introduce your 2. Dr. DuPont can start off and then you can bring in Seth.
Okay.
And then I'll introduce the moderators at about 6:30.
Perfect. All right, Dr. DuPont, why don't you talk a little bit about, you want to start with persons with disabilities and in crisis or with youth. So I know you're going to talk about both, so just tell us which one you're going to start with. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Ken. I'm assuming my mic is coming through good. Let me know if there's any problem.
We can hear you. I can hear you.
That's always encouraging. Appreciate it. We want to look a little bit at where we are with behavioral intervention strategies with the individuals who have disabilities, and also the issue of youth. We're probably the farthest along on the behavioral policies that we have that have done. I think they're so far looking pretty good. We're getting some encouraging preliminary data on the impact on things like arrest rate and other things of that nature. So we're pleased to that regard. Where that stands is that we've had an active group called CPIC, which is a community-based group that's designed to provide feedback. They have a subcommittee that has been involved with a number of individuals throughout the community and a number of people who are involved in professional capacity with youth and with those with disability as well. And that they developed the training itself. The policy has already been completed. The officers have been trained on the behavioral health policies, and they are now at a point where they're actually looking for additional feedback about how to revise those policies. So the behavioral health one is probably the farthest along. And now what they're trying to do is to finish out the training that allows them to develop a specialized team who will provide the leadership and interventions when it comes to individuals who are struggling with behavioral disability, different types of disabilities. And that I think will make a difference because those individuals will be volunteering to be the leaders in these efforts. So we're very pleased about that and excited. They're probably accomplished about 50% of the training that they wanted to on that regard. Once they get to a critical mass, we'll be looking for them to take leadership on various events that are coming. But I would encourage people to take a look at the behavioral health policies, which have been reposted to the website for BPD, and to please feel free to make comments because this is the right time to do it. They're in a revision stage where they're trying to look at the original documentation and how it's worked out. Anybody else too, I would also encourage you to join CPIC, which is an organization that's available, that we have very active participation, sometimes in meetings as many as 50 or more people who have a very much of a very strong interest in trying to help support the police in developing a new strategy and a new approach. And so far that seems to be working again fairly well. We've established very good partnerships with the behavioral crisis arms of the mental health services in Baltimore, and as well as BHSB, which is the agency that oversees all mental health services for this area. Again, as those partnerships are working along, what we have found is that the city has become very active in trying to make these things happen in a positive way, which is, I think, what I've been hearing from advocates all along, is that they wanted to have a more city involvement, and I think that is happening, and so we're pleased to see that happening as well. The youth policies are just now reaching their fruition. There's a interaction with youth policy that's actually still on the BPD website, and they're looking for feedback. I think they're supposed to close the feedback in a couple of days, but I would encourage you to email if you miss that deadline. But again, this would be the time to make comments. Those policies were developed in collaboration with a number of youth agencies and with individuals. They've had 2 different workshops in which they had invited individuals to come that represented a number of different youth organizations. I think they had in the order of 50 at each of those attendance, and they got the feedback of what needed to change in those policies. They've also started an in-service at this time that involves teaching officers about techniques and intervention strategies with youth. What I like about that too is that they have developed a video that was done by a group called No Boundaries Coalition, which is a coalition of individuals interested in making change in the way that individuals respond to youth. And it was a very powerful video, one that the officers liked. It was candid. It was young individuals talking about their experience with the police and what they looked for with the police. I think that had an impact during the training. We're getting good feedback on the ratings that officers are making about that training itself. That's coming to an end shortly. And again, the policy is also going to be brought out as well, and then there'll be training on that particular policy. So that's my quick analysis. I will add one more. Seth, are you going to respond on the police, the school police, or would you like me to come on that as well?
Go ahead.
All right, I want to thank, first of all, Roberto Villasenor, who is one of our monitoring team members. He was unavailable because of his previous plans for this meeting, but asked me to present some of the information he has. And what the consent decree does require that the BPD review the MOU between the school police and the department itself, and to make sure that that's all consistent with the kind of requirements of the monitoring team and of the consent decree. That was done, but unfortunately, some of the ongoing activities of the school police were curtailed due to COVID. But now they've done a second a review of that MOU, published those results, and the school police are back in sort of their full swing now that COVID is abating somewhat. And they're going to look and see how does that MOU and the activities of the school police match up to what's expected under the consent decree. So we're pleased that that's moving forward, and glad that that's going to bring about a great deal of consistency between what's happening with the Baltimore police and their reform, and making sure that it's consistent with how the school police operate as well.
Thank you, Randy. Seth, you want to talk a little bit about First Amendment?
Sure. And Randy, are you going to talk about, you can talk about interactions with youth after I'm done, or did you want to cover that now?
Well, I was mentioning that the policy itself for the youth is indeed coming up and is active. It was a part of a initial community set of 2 community forums, which again were well attended, and that indeed led to the current interaction with youth policy that's at the website, and I think that that has been so far doing quite well. There's also a training around interactions with youth that's been conducted, had good input throughout the process. As I mentioned, the video was real critical, and I think that also was something that's moving along. It's not as far along as the behavioral policies regarding individual disability, but it's being completed as we speak, and I would strongly encourage them to jump on that website and provide feedback.
Good. And the only thing that I would add around the training on youth interactions, which was just completed. In fact, BPD filed their certificate of compliance with the court today, is that, it did include very active facilitation and instruction from youth advocacy groups within the community. So it was not just BPD instructors who were conducting that training. It also included folks from the community.
Yes, if I can mention, you're absolutely correct on that, because it's also true for the adult side that they've been using a great deal of volunteer help from the community to provide that expertise. And it's been something BPD is, I think, rightfully proud of. So thanks, Seth.
Good. Let me cover responses to First Amendment protected activity. This is an important area of the consent decree. The consent decree talks about 3 different First Amendment rights that are at play there. The first is the freedom to assemble, so the freedom to protest and to demonstrate. The second is freedom of speech, which is, the right to speak your mind, which includes the right to criticize police officers directly to their face. And the third is the right to observe and record police engaged in their official duties. So all 3 of those First Amendment rights are addressed explicitly within the consent decree. Background here is that in the Justice Department's investigation, which led to our consent decree, DOJ found a pattern or practice of constitutional violations with respect to one of those protected rights in particular, and that is the right to free speech. What DOJ found is that BPD officers were engaged in a pattern or practice of retaliating against civilians exercising free speech. Retaliation by detaining them, retaliation by arresting them, often on charges of disorderly conduct, and perhaps most problematically, retaliation by using force against them, by tackling them to the ground or striking them or using other kinds of force against them in retaliation for their exercising their First Amendment rights, to include criticizing police activity. So that's where the consent decree started. We've come a long way since then. We are just about to begin our first comprehensive assessment of BPD's compliance in the First Amendment arena. We have not yet undertaken a formal assessment, but we have been monitoring BPD's work in the First Amendment area along the way. And we have, at least to date, again, without having engaged in a formal assessment, encouraged by what we have seen. As in the youth and interactions with individuals with behavioral health disabilities arena, BPD has put together new policies. They have trained officers on those policies, department-wide training, both e-learning and in-service or in-class training. And they're about to deliver specialized training on responses to demonstrations or protest activities specifically. They've just finished the training curriculum, which was put out for public comment on 2 different occasions in the last couple of months. They'll be finalizing the curriculum, and then they will be training officers using that curriculum beginning next year. The positive signs that we're seeing, the kind of shoots of grass, green grass that we're seeing that suggest that BPD is on the path to compliance, are as follows. First, when the George Floyd racial justice protests took place in the late spring and early summer of 2020 in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, BPD acquitted itself quite well in response to 2 weeks of pretty intensive, large protests in Baltimore. In fact, when the New York Times did a study of 12 major police departments' response to large-scale protest activity in the wake of George Floyd's murder, Baltimore and BPD was the only one of the 12 that scored highly, that basically, came off looking the way a police department should, and that was commended for its response to the protest activity. And BPD will be the first to admit this. A large part of that had to do with the folks who were organizing the protests and how those protests were put together, which were very effective and very orderly. But BPD did acquit itself well in response to those protests. We were able to observe those protests nightly from the command center in BPD, where Ken and I and several of our colleagues spent time, and also on the street, where we had several of our members on the street observing police reaction to protesters during that 2 or 3 week period. We will again be conducting a more formal assessment of BPD's response to that protest activity in the coming months, where we're looking at how BPD conducted itself with dispersal orders, what it did with respect to arrests, what it did with respect to uses of force during the course of that protest activity. But what we saw, what we observed was positive. And BPD itself conducted its own audits of its officers' conduct during the George Floyd protests of 2020. We've reviewed those reports. We've reviewed the evidence underneath those reports. And those reports show that BPD acquitted itself well too, that it did not violate people's First Amendment rights in the arrests, and it did not make very many arrests, but in the few arrests that it made during the course of the protests, it did not violate people's First Amendment rights by using force in retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights. And it did not violate people's First Amendment rights by unnecessarily interfering with or shutting down protected protest activity. So that's what BPD's own audit department found, and we are going to be looking behind those audits in the coming months to confirm whether the audits got it right. So that's one of the things that we found. Another of the things that we have found is that we just recently finished our first comprehensive review of BPD's use of force. We will be publishing that report in the next 6 weeks for everybody to see. But one of the things that we found in the report, because one of the things we were looking at is whether officers in the force incidents that we looked at from 2018, 2019, and 2020 were using force in retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights. And in those 3 years, we only found one case where a BPD officer may have used force in retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights in the hundreds of cases that we examined. And those cases were a representative random sample of all use of force cases during that 3-year period that produced statistically significant results. And so we have reached the initial determination that BPD is in compliance with that particular prohibition against the use of force in retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights in the consent decree. And that's potentially a big thing. And it's potentially a big thing because, as I said at the outset, the one area involving First Amendment where the Department of Justice found a pattern of practice of First Amendment violations was BPD officers' use of force or other retaliatory measures for the exercise of First Amendment rights. And the fact that we took a look at this important representative random sample of use of force cases and really did not find officers using force in retaliation for the exercise of First Amendment rights is important. So that's where we are, and we'll have more to say about that once we finish our comprehensive assessment, which should be sometime this winter.
Thank you, Seth. Wanda, you want to open it up for a few questions until your moderator's ready?
Sure. Let's see, Mark Kelly and Dr. Leaf, could you introduce yourselves and give our audience a little background information on you? so they'll know who is with us tonight. Gentlemen.
All right. I'm Mark Kelly, lifelong Baltimore resident. I work for CPP, which is a social justice organization, nonprofit, centered around mainly right now the consent decree monitoring and police reform in general. And yeah, I've been in the social justice field for about 3 years now.
Great, thanks for joining us. Dr. Leaf?
Great, thank you. Phil Leaf, I'm a recent professor emeritus from Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, and had appointments in the schools of medicine, nursing, and education. And also directed sort of a CDC-funded Center on Prevention of Youth Violence and also adolescent health, and have only been a resident in Baltimore for 32 years, so I'm sort of a newcomer.
Thank you for joining us. Mark, would you like to start with your questions or comments?
Sure. So I just wanted to know what I saw in the consent decree that the police was mandated to have regular meetings with youth. I just wanted to know like the progress with those meetings, or like, do they start after the training is finished, or have they already been like underway?
You want me to go ahead and take that?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
go ahead, Randy.
Okay, sure. Yeah, Mr. Kelly, the meetings have been ongoing. What they started with was a basic youth comment period. I think that took place in December of 2020. I think the other one was January of 2021, and I think they've continued to have different types of meetings. Those were the main kickoff workshops that were designed to try to solicit information from individuals who might be able to help the department understand how to better respond to youth and to address some of the issues that were raised. Attendance of both of those were well over 50 individuals that attended. But it really didn't stop there. What they've done is they've also brought in a number of both youth advocates and youth themselves to participate in the development of the training program. I think I mentioned that a group called No Boundaries was responsible for making a very detailed and fairly honest video of the reaction of individuals. There was a program whose name I'm not familiar with. I think it's called the Choice Program, was also involved in that. In addition, they had a group called the Maryland Mentors. John Hopkins participated. I'm not sure exactly which part of John Hopkins did, but I know that they did. And there was other groups as well, including the community group that was formed to help address issues with individual struggling with behavioral issues or with disabilities. So that's still ongoing. They're still going to be working on the policy itself. So I think that would be an opportunity to participate. I'd encourage you, if you're interested, to join in with CPIC, which is involved with a number of issues involving youth. And it's a very active organization that's going through a great deal of transition that's going to be, I think, potentially positive because it'll involve it more with the city and with the city's governance structure. I think that means that it's going to be a permanent thing that'll be ongoing. Mark, I hope that answers your question, but please feel free to follow up with me and let me know what else might be helpful.
No, I did. Thank you. So like outside of those meetings or those like organizational trainings or whatever, like outside of that, what strategies are you guys using or planning to use to like develop a more positive relationship between the youth and the police?
Well, I think that one thing, there are a couple things that they're doing, I think that are indeed gonna make a difference, and the first one is simply the training does involve a number of youth-specific issues such as age-appropriate techniques and understanding different strategies that have been successful to deal with those that have been traumatized by previous events and by the police themselves. They are doing a lot of trauma-informed interviewing training with them. So there's a number of skills they're trying to impart. But also, I think the other thing that's going on is that there's been good participation in the training committee and active discussion around those kind of issues. I think that the other thing that's happening is that a number of the monitoring team individuals are riding with the police, which gives us an opportunity to see firsthand. I know that our chief monitor, Ken Thompson, has been involved with some of the ongoing issues that are involved as well, that I think you would be aware of, that involve youth, and that we're trying to help encourage solutions for those things. I think there's always room for improvement. They're talking now of trying to have groups that work with the city and the police and of course the consent decree to try to kind of keep that going. And I think this is a time when you might want to consider being part of that, because I think that's when they do need that input, and it would be extremely valuable. Finally, there's more formalized programs they're developing. They're developing a diversion program, which needs a lot of input, and I think is struggling to get up the volume that they would like to see. But it would be basically an attempt to not focus on criminal justice solutions, but on more social and healthcare solutions for when there are interactions between police and youth. And I would tell you that that's important. I believe it's called Sidestep is the name they're using for that.
Yes.
But again, I would really like to encourage greater community participation so that it becomes the success that it needs to be.
And Mark, I can put you in touch with both of those groups to make certain that you know the meeting times and are able to give your input. So we'll chat after this. Dr. Leaf, you have questions for us or comments?
Well, a couple of questions. One comment is just, I think it's very positive and appreciative that these quarterly meetings are taking place, originally so in person and that now by Zoom, by being able to give people access to hear what's going on, and I've had attended a number of them previously. I guess one question around the sort of the mental health and dealing with people with mental health and the responses is that some of that responsibility also lies outside the police, because it's calling for other groups to take on responsibility. There's a group, GBRICS, which is a large multi-county and city collaboration that's working on those issues. Again, just getting started. And a number of other groups within Baltimore City, some of which have realized that some of the victims or people affected by violence are not necessarily the individual who may have been a victim of the shooter, that they're next door neighbors. We've had incidences where very young children who were sitting on their porches have been murdered because of somebody running down the street, and the other children that are there. I guess what's the role of the police officers when they believe that there are these other groups that should be involved? To be, is that part of the training to, there's the part of training and the administrative procedures for that not to be involved, and to have the alternatives there is one thing. But is there a part of, a legitimate part of, as often somebody on the scene that allows them to call up to, whether it's dialing 988 themselves, which is the something that every citizen is able to do, or more specifically be able to bring in some of those other resources that the city is developing or putting in for dealing with persons with mental illness when they may get on the scene and have a different opinion of what's going on or different information of what's going on than when there was an initial call.
Well,
No,
again,
Randy, can I ask you one thing? You might want to talk a little bit about the gap analysis, because I think that's relevant to this question.
I think it is, Ken. Good point. Certainly, if I was going to tell you that one of the reasons I like being part of this consent decree is that it was very forward thinking in the beginning. What they said was exactly what you've said here, which is that you've got to look at community resources and figure out how we can shift some of the responsibilities. But then the question was raised of, but are there the resources available? So as Ken pointed out, one of the first requirements of the consent decree was to tackle an analysis of what is Baltimore's capacity to respond. Where are the other alternative sources, and are they adequate? That was done about 2 years ago. It was done by a firm out of Cambridge that has a lot of experience. I think they ended up making 48 recommendations that Baltimore needed to take a close look at to see if they really are ready to take a serious effort to move things from where the police are the primary source of response to where other mental health, social services, and social agencies and support groups and peer groups were available. And that really has had an impact. And what's happened since then is that the city has really decided to become a major player in this effort. The city has indeed tackled these efforts, as you mentioned GBRICS, which was the state's effort, I think, to tackle the very same thing, but perhaps on an even bigger scale than just Baltimore, but including the surrounding counties. Then in addition to that, we've had the city make the same kind of commitment. And there is not just commitment in name, but we're talking about several $1 million contracts to improve crisis intervention strategies, et cetera. One of the things we're doing with the monitoring team is to monitor what's happening there. We are fortunate enough that the crisis organization in here with BCRI is sharing their data with us. That GBRICS is also sharing their progression with us and with the city, and we're getting a regular report on where GBRICS is and how fast it's moving or where it needs to move even faster. But I think the focus, again, as you point out, is on what other resources are available for the police and how much are they being utilized. So we're looking at a couple of intersection points when we do that. The first is, can we intervene, as you point out, to redirect from 911 to 988? And we're having some success in that indeed. It's not as large scale as we would like. I'd like to see that expanded, but it is happening, and we're dealing with somewhere around 800 to 1,000 calls a year now that are being redirected into agencies like the 988 related agencies. So we're really pleased that that's happening. We're also, though, training the officers. We're going to have a leadership group of officers that's it's almost reaching a critical mass. It's not quite there yet, but they're going to be responsible, and they have specialized training done by the community, done by individuals who are experts in these areas, to not only be attentive to those that are, as you point out, that are sometimes dramatically impacted by crisis events, who are not always getting the services they might need, but also to look at whether those services are making a difference or not. We're going to be looking at all that, but we're training the police to be able to take leadership in trying to provide a change in direction. I'm really optimistic on that front because I think that that is indeed, as you point out, probably one of the most critical elements. Can we shift the paradigm to where it's a paradigm that it's a police response is mostly what's available and the court of last resort when it comes to a crisis event? And can we make it so that the mental health system is going to step forward and be able to do that? I will tell you, I'm optimistic because GBRICS itself, for example, as you point out, is going to add 5 full-time crisis teams to the Baltimore area. We've already had an increase of 2 or 3 already based on city funding for bridge funding that will allow us to do that. So the capacity is developing. I don't think it's fully there yet because they weren't able to see all the cases that were diverted from 911 to 988. But I do think that it's moving in that direction. And one of the things the consent decree is going to take a close look at is how much have we really succeeded in that regard. So I know that's a long-winded answer. Sorry about that, Ken, and sorry about that, Philip. But I do think that it's very critical to that. And I like the fact that the consent decree is saying one of the goal, we got a goal here of improving police response. But our secondary goal here, and it's in the consent decree and agreed to by the city and the BPD, is to also shift the focus away from police response and into the response of the community as people are wanting and are demanding. And I think we've got the cooperation of agencies like BHSB and BCRI and the city in order to make those things happen. So I'm reasonably optimistic, but again, we're waiting on looking at the hard data and trying to be sure.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Miller, do we have any questions in the chat?
Let's see, Ms. Wanda, I don't see that we have any as of yet. We have a couple
Okay.
posts to policies for everyone to reference.
Okay, anything else there you want to share? We have a few minutes. So I know I saw some people come on.
Yeah, can I ask Seth when he was talking about use of force? I mean, he was talking about it primarily with respect to the First Amendment issues, but I think it might be helpful, Seth, to give those on this call some perspective in terms of some of the things that we've seen over the years, like pre-training and post-training and the results, whether there's been a drop in excessive use of force cases or has there been an increase. I think folks might be interested in hearing some of the preliminary results in that regard.
Right. Well, and I want to emphasize that they're preliminary because, you know, they're still under review by the Department of Justice and BPD, who have a right under the consent decree to review our findings before we publish them. You know, but I can say, you know, certain things that are just facts. You know, one is that the number of cases, use of force cases between 2018, which is really when we started our work in earnest, and 2021 has dropped pretty precipitously, you know, by, you know, upwards of 50%, which is pretty significant. And at the same time, this is actually, you know, a point that one of the chiefs, the former chiefs, Taz Villasenor on our team, has pointed out, is that although the number of use of force cases has dropped year over year pretty significantly, that is not in the context of calls for service dropping, meaning that there haven't been fewer interactions between community members and the police as uses of force have dropped. There have actually been more calls for service and therefore more interactions between members of the police, between police officers and members of the community, while at the same time the use of force cases have dropped. So that's significant that officers are more often choosing not to use force in their interactions with civilians and are instead using de-escalation techniques which obviate the need for use of force. So that's what at least the statistics are beginning to show. And again, that's just looking at the statistics. But one of the, you know, the other main thing that we did and this is the most time consuming thing we did, is we looked, as I said earlier, at a representative random sample of use of force cases over a 3-year period, 2018 to 2020, to take a look at, okay, well, even though use of force may be declining, qualitatively, like, are BPD officers doing what they're supposed to do? Meaning, are they de-escalating when that's possible? And when they use force, are they using force only when it's necessary? And are they using force only that's reasonable and proportional to the threat posed? And we have found that in the mine run of cases, in the vast majority of cases, officers are de-escalating and officers are using force only when necessary. And when they're using force that's reasonable and proportional. So all of that's good. We don't think they're yet at a point where they're in compliance with the consent decree because, you know, although the vast majority, upwards of 90% of the cases involve uses of force that are appropriate, we don't think they're quite to the point where they need to be to reach compliance, but they're certainly getting there. On the other hand, one of the places where we found that they have a way to go before they reach compliance is in supervisory review of use of force. So one of the things we found is that where we, the monitoring team, found that the use of force was not in compliance with policy, BPD itself, up through the chain of command, was not similarly finding those uses of force to be in violation of policy and was not taking corrective action in those instances. Important point is that this is literally a handful of cases where we're finding use of force problems, but BPD, to be the kind of reflective, self-correcting agency that the consent decree calls for, in its chain of command, needs to be ferreting out those inappropriate uses of force, just like we are as the monitoring team, and correcting them. And we have tentatively found, again, these are preliminary findings, that BPD is not yet where it needs to be in terms of identifying and correcting the small number of inappropriate uses of force that we found.
Thanks, Seth.
Okay, do we have any more questions? Miller, did anyone put any questions in there or have any comments?
I don't. Well, we do have one comment from a citizen who made a note that it was great to hear anything has declined with regards to the use of force. So a citizen who is glad to hear that we are seeing some changes in the right direction. We also have another comment here. that is contrary to the one that we just got, saying that citizen here believes that the police are still using force and intimidating the homeless community. Those were
Okay.
the two that we have right now. I don't have any questions, though.
Okay, I believe that Ally Smith put in the policy numbers that are up for review right now, that the community can actually give their input. It was near the top. And I can't turn mine on now. Dr. Leaf, did you have any comments?
I just wonder, yeah, so people are making some comments who happen to be on the Facebook, and is there a procedure that should be used by community people if they feel, but both as a violation, but also I think if there's some positive stuff, people have recognized change, because I think sometimes part of the challenge is when people make changes and there's effect, they're not getting positive feedback that's being recognized, and again, having some of the data, but maybe just both for people who are on the Facebook, and I assume we can also then more people will be watching it, not live. What particularly around the mental health and the differences between youth and adult potential responses, which are sort of the two of the topics for today. Is there a reporting procedure that community people could be using?
Randy, you want to take that on, and I'll.
Well, Ken, I think let me ask you to start with the fact that it's just the simple. I hear the question being asked is if they want to provide feedback to the police.
Sure, I'll take
incidents,
that.
Yeah,
I'll take that.
all right.
The way it works, Doctor, and this is so important to the overall process, we as the monitoring team do our best to encourage the public that it's, to use that old adage, if you see something, say something. And so let's start with things that people feel are inappropriate. I mean, that's what the Public Integrity Bureau is all about. I mean, you can file complaints or concerns with the Public Integrity Bureau. You can do it anonymously if you want to. You can send it in anonymously. If you want to go down to Kirk Avenue where they're located, you can go in and talk to someone at the front desk. You can contact the monitoring team, and we'll make sure that the complaint makes its way over to the appropriate people at PIB. But I just don't always want to talk about bad things, because there are a lot of good things that happen in this arena. And maybe Randy, you can talk a little bit about one of the pilot programs in terms of the diversion effort. But we also hear from folks who are very appreciative of the way police have begun to respond in a very, very empathetic way. And so, you can, if you see something good, you can go through the same process. You can tell PIB, or you can tell the monitoring team, look, we love the way this officer, handled this situation. He or she de-escalated what could have been a nasty situation, turned out to be resolved, and the person who was having some problems got some help. I mean, those are the kinds of things that are so important. And when I say we, I'm talking about the entire process, but the monitoring team in particular, in order for us to do our job and in order for this process to be successful, we must have community involvement. I mean, there's no way around it. You've got 500,000 residents of this city, close to 600,000. And, there are 20 plus folks on the monitoring team. Well, we can't see it all and we can't do it all. And it's so important that the ears on the street open their mouths and say something when they either see things they don't like or see things they do like. We may not agree with you, but that's fine. I mean, it's a free country. Everybody has the right to their opinion, but it's important, I think, to have the conversation and the discourse. So that's what I would say, Doctor, in terms of how we expect hope these matters are communicated. So Randy, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, I also want to just emphasize that Jessica Drake has put up on the chat a general number for the monitoring team, info@bpdmonitor.com. I would strongly recommend people share things there with us. I think if it rises to a certain level of concern, yes, you've heard Ken talk about the ways that one can bring those to the attention of the police and those in charge. But also, I think the positive parts too, I'd like to also suggest you bring those up as well, as Ken is suggesting, and then use our info@bpdmonitor.com as you see incidents that you feel simply you need to call to our attention. I would encourage you though also to get people to participate, and I don't mean to keep on the same track here, but we really want to have people participate at at CPIC, which is a community-based organization that's trying to look into these issues, particularly for those who have behavioral issues or disabilities. But I think also we're also interested in ongoing feedback from youth and others involved with youth. So I don't think that this is at all just a send us an email situation, but rather we'd like to see active participation of people showing up either on Zoom or in person at the meetings that are being held.
Thank you,
Randy.
Randy. And I did put some contact information in the Facebook Live chat as far as our website, as well as how to email us. But it also gives you information on our neighborhood liaisons. We have a liaison in each one of the police districts in Baltimore City that you can reach out to, and you can talk to them anonymously. We don't have to have your name. We don't have to have your phone number or your email address. I'm going to take it if you're willing to give it to us, but it's not necessary. And we do need to hear the good and the bad, and we need to have community engagement. This is not going to work otherwise. People ask, when is this process going to be over? And it's only going to be over until we all are on the same page. And that's going to take us stepping up as community and assisting the police with the work that has to be done. We can't have this all one-sided. It can't be police on one side, community on the other. We have to work together on this. Are there any other questions? Miller? Did anyone ask anything? Or Mark or Dr. Leaf, do you have anything that you want to add? I know, Dr. Leaf, we talked earlier this morning about an incident that happened a couple of weeks ago on the weekend. You might want to elaborate on.
I think so. So there was an incident about homeless people who were under the bridge that occurred, and there was questions about the police response, but also that behavioral services crisis response also wasn't called in, some of the police the next day actually were wondering why they hadn't been called in. So I guess that back to my initial question, that it's appropriate, for, again, people involved, whether the community people or the police, to use sort of channels to both when things don't happen, to be able to report those, but also the day afterwards, the officers that came, and there was a lot of concern about, because of the evening before, were very positive, and several of the community people talked about how they really appreciated the way they were handling the situation that day. So again, getting the positive feedback to hopefully not just at the incident level, but for again, supervisors to know who's able to, who has done a good job, who has found themselves in an incident that is problematic and handled it very well. Which again, when nothing happens, it's hard to document. Nothing happened. I mean, again, the fact that somebody did something and there was no complaint, or even that there was a lot of positive feedback, we don't have ways of getting that to either their supervisors or to you, to be able to identify those people who may become the mentors or the coaches within the police department in the future, because they've gone through these experiences and done well. So again, thinking about the need to have that some sort of responding, information exchanges, so those people who are employees who are doing good jobs, so nothing bad happens, but there isn't a reporting system for having the good stuff. The fact that nothing bad happened in a very troubling or problematic incident. So I'm just again thinking about those things, as well as again the information for when people do have concerns, to be able to report them. So that they're at least documented, if not responded to.
So Seth, I don't want to ignore you. So maybe you can add a little bit more to what I said in terms of access and how folks can help with the training, help with getting information. That's both good and bad. And then Randy, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about the homeless component, because that is a big part of what you're doing, and it does play a big part in the gap analysis. So Seth, if you don't mind, maybe you can help get the doctor to give him, even more information so that he can help us get it out so people will understand what you can do.
Right. Well, I think Randy can probably speak most to this, at least in connection with police response to people experiencing behavioral health disabilities or in crisis. And that, Randy can talk about CPIC and how to get involved with that. He talked about that a little bit already. I mean, just very generally in terms of getting involved with the consent decree process, every time BPD issues a new policy or a revised policy, it will put the policy, a draft of the policy, out to the public and give the public a chance to comment on the policy. The first comment period is usually 30 days. The second comment period is usually 2 weeks. So the public has the opportunity to comment on and help shape police department policy on issues that are important to it. The same is true with respect to training. BPD will draft, with our input and the input from the Justice Department, training curriculum on each subject. And before it goes live with the training, it will put the draft curriculum out for public comment, receive and address public comments within the curriculum before finalizing and piloting the curriculum and then delivering the training department-wide. So there are those opportunities for the community to get engaged. Also on certain, for certain training courses, there is a community training, it's the CTRC, Community Training Review Committee, which involves representatives from every police district, certain advocacy groups, the public defender's office, the prosecutor's office, state's attorney's office, and several other stakeholders in Baltimore. And for key trainings, that group is invited in to observe the pilot sessions for the training and to provide feedback so that before the training actually goes live within the department, BPD and its education and training section can respond to any concerns that the observers of those pilot training sessions voice, or any input that the observers of those pilot training sessions have. So that's generally the way the process has worked under the consent decree to date, and it will continue to work that way with new or revised policies and new training. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, Ken, but that's
Exactly. I wanted the doctor to hear the entire process, and
right.
so maybe Randy.
Maybe Randy can speak more directly to how to get involved in CPIC and its processes.
Well,
And in particular, Randy, focus a little bit on the housing, because that's something.
Yeah, let me talk if I could, because Dr. Leaf, I was not aware of the situation until you talked to Wanda about it, and I did ask for a sort of an informal assessment of it. And indeed, it sounds like some of the things maybe need to be kind of assessed to bring about those social services in a situation as you described, which involves a homeless encampment, as I understand it. So I think that's a good idea. That was something the department had been doing on a regular basis. We've had some issues with a number of individuals who have been promoted in positions that have not been filled, and now they're finally trying to backfill those positions, and they have done so successfully. But I know that we need to go back to some of the things that were working in that regard in particular. I have heard the same reports you did, which is that basically when the right expertise was brought to the scene the next day, that things did go much better and much more and had more successful resolution. So I think that, again, to me, that shows that it was really important that we have the connectedness that happened when you talk with Wanda, that we can kind of make sure that things are going the way they should. And I think that indeed the response has been positive at this point. So without getting into all the details, I think I appreciate you bringing it to people's attention. And I do think that social services are a very important part of any intervention when it comes to large-scale interventions with those that are homeless, particularly.
Okay, thank you. We have about 4 minutes left. Is there anyone who'd like to give a last minute comment or statement?
I will add that, again, I want to, as Ken pointed out, I really want to encourage all of you all to be involved with CPIC and the organizations that try to address this. We have good representations from Disability Rights Maryland, from others as well. And I really would encourage you all to be part of this so that the feedback can keep coming, so that we can address these concerns where there is a better response that may not have been a path that may not have been taken. It would be good to know that, so that BPD, I think, is responsive to those things and can take those paths in the future.
And if the website's correct, the next CPIC meeting's tomorrow at 5:30.
That's correct.
Yes.
Please join in.
That is
So
correct.
Wanda, let me, I will say this because I mean, Seth did a really, really good job of addressing the First Amendment issues. And I don't want folks to just think that what BP has done is easy. I mean, that's a very difficult area that in terms of police officers responding in a negative way when they're being photographed or they're being, yelled at or whatever. And I think when you look at Baltimore City, and we have the George Floyd event to look to. I mean, it's, when you do these scientific experiences, you need an event, a sentinel event like that. And of course, as bad as it was, it really stressed the department. It really put the department to a point where they had to respond either the right way or the wrong way. And I am proud of Baltimore City. We don't normally get good reviews, by many folks, but in terms of the department's response to the First Amendment issue that they were stressed at and had to respond to with respect to George Floyd was quite incredible. And again, I'm going to add what Seth said. It wasn't just BPD alone, the community. And I mean, I saw this firsthand. I mean, we had a lot, I'm not going to mention the groups because they probably don't want to be mentioned, but there were a lot of community groups out here who were keeping the peace and they were helping the police. I mean, I actually saw an event on Baltimore Street where, it was probably an instigator from the outside who was trying to start trouble at throwing a Molotov cocktail in the middle of where the police were standing. And it was the community who literally whisked this fellow away, and out of the crowd. And quite frankly, I think the police were so surprised that when they handed him over to them the first time, they didn't know what to do because they've never gotten that kind of response before. And I think finally they realized, hey, maybe we better take him in to custody for his own protection. But it's just an example of, if you train these police officers right and you hire the right police officers, you can get a good result. So that's kind of my final comment.
Okay, thank you. We're going to wrap up now. And again, I can't stress enough that we need community engagement. And you can always send a message through Facebook Live, or not Facebook Live, but through Facebook or through our website. And one of us will respond to you directly. It won't be like it goes into a black box and nobody ever sees what your comments. And we can take the good with the bad. We like to hear all of the things. I'd like to thank everybody again for joining us. Dr. Leaf, thank you. And Mark, thank you very much for extending yourselves tonight. We appreciate you. And I'd like to say good night. Mr. Miller, can you take us home?
I will, and I just want to close out by saying that we will reach out to a couple people who posted in the Facebook Live comment section to follow up on some of their comments. And thanks everyone for a lively discussion, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Good night.